I don't think that Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things is a particularly good movie. However, I appear to be obsessed with it. All the cool kids are saying that so and so lives rent free in my mind. But that doesn't even begin to describe how mesmerized I am by this movie. It's not just crashing on my couch and eating all my Doritos. I'm Thinking of Ending Things and I are in an on and off again relationship. And I keep booty calling them at 3 in the morning. It's all so nice until we get in another argument and I kick them out. But we both know I'm gonna call again tomorrow. Before we continue, here's the obligatory warning that this essay contains spoilers. That being said, if you haven't seen the movie, then I imagine all of this will be incomprehensible anyway. I've seen it 5 times now, and I still feel like I'm having a fever dream when I try to talk about it. One of the go-to lines for die-hard fans defending a complex work of art is, "If you didn't like it, you must not have really understood it." Dude, 90% of this movie feels like it was specifically designed to woo me. I love to annoy my fiancé by singing haunting a cappella covers of commercial jingles. My undergraduate degree is in film theory, so when the young woman is suddenly possessed by Pauline Kael, I ate it up with my pretentious little spoon. Most importantly, I freaking love the musical Oklahoma. I am one of the world's foremost Oklahoma apologists. Every time this movie references Oklahoma or any other musical, I giggle and clap like a toddler playing peekaboo. Sweet tap dancing theater kid Jesus, do I understand this film. I think that's why it disappoints me so much. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which we shall now call ITOET, or ITOT, is a trip. No pun intended. It has so many delightfully upsetting visuals and uncomfortable pauses. It thrives off you, the viewer, constantly going, I, I'm sorry, what? I don't. But then it starts to explain itself a little too clearly, and in a way that feels like it negates a lot of the eccentric whimsy that came before it. The film has so many bizarre yet relatable things to say about relationships and self-image, as explored by our protagonist's surreal evening with her boyfriend and his parents. But then it feels like the film wants you to shelve all of that once it decides the protagonist isn't the protagonist. Our heroine, credited only as the young woman, is a blur of indecision and contradictions. Theoretically, her name is Lucy, but also Lucia and Louisa. She's a poet, a painter, a neurobiologist, a quantum physicist, a gerontologist. Of course, these things don't have to be mutually exclusive. She could just be the most interesting woman on Earth. But actually, she's a figment of her quote-unquote boyfriend Jake's imagination. In reality, he's a lonely old janitor making up what his younger life could have been. The title is a double entendre. The young woman is thinking of ending her relationship with Jake, while Jake the janitor is thinking of ending his life. In theory, this is all well and good and Kaufman-esque, but it ultimately comes at the expense of the young woman's narrative arc and meaning. The audience experiences the vast majority of ITOT from the young woman's perspective. We see what she sees, we hear what she thinks. Both her and the viewer are constantly evaluating and reevaluating what we think of Jake. He seems like a nice enough guy, but is nice enough actually enough? How do you know whether the malaise you're feeling is a natural part of settling into a relationship or a sign that something is really wrong? Once things start to get objectively really wrong, the young woman starts to freak out, but she still tries to stave it off. She forces a smile even as tears run down her cheeks. Maybe this is just a different kind of normal. Maybe it's gonna be okay. It's not. The deeper we delve into the madness of the film, the more it becomes clear that it's an exploration of what it's like to share your life with someone else, whether that's a partner, a parent, or society at large. The young woman becomes steadily more aware of herself and the world around her. In one of her internal rants, she says,
I don't even know who I am in this whole thing anymore. Where I stop and Jake starts.
That becomes a major theme, not being able to maintain that sense of self. It's even harder when you're constantly nudged along by what others expect of you or what you expected of yourself, and you can't quite seem to live up to all that. iTote loves to mess around with time and space. Around 15 minutes into my first viewing, I began to wonder if this entire movie was going to take place exclusively in the car, with the exception of the janitor's scenes. Then they get to the house, but as the young woman keeps begging Jake to leave, I began to wonder if they ever really would or could. Then they finally get back in the car and it feels like some kind of miracle, but then there's the matter of actually getting home, which they never do. Every new development feels like it will never end. Like, is this my life now? Kind of like a bad relationship. I think that's pretty darn cool. The young woman herself has a lot to say about time.
People like to think of themselves as points moving through time, but I think it's probably the opposite. We're stationary, and time passes through us, blowing like cold wind, stealing our heat, leaving us chapped and frozen.
What are you thinking?
I don't know. Dead. I feel like I was that wind tonight, blowing through Jake's parents, seeing them as they were, seeing them as they will be, seeing them after they're gone.
What are you...
When only I'm left.
What are you thinking?
Only the wind. Not much.
That probably sounds familiar to people who struggle with depression, dissociation, anything that leaves you feeling untethered from the rest of the world. The thing is, the parents are already long gone, and the young woman was never here to begin with. What we've been watching is Jake's idealized fantasy of what it would have been like to finally bring a girl home to his parents. The details keep warping as he keeps changing his mind about who he wants the girl to be, and how the conversation, quote-unquote, should have gone. That retroactively makes sense, but it also feels like it renders some of the most interesting parts of the movie moot. For the last 20 minutes of the movie, we are fully entrenched in Jake's delusions. It's a whole grand pageant of a beautiful mind, Oklahoma, and yes, even more Oklahoma. You bet your ass I started hooting and hollering the instant I realized they were about to do the famous dream ballet. Famous, infamous, potato. Anyway, once the young woman walks down that hallway, she no longer matters. She's relegated to supporting character status. Her job is to smile wistfully through comically unconvincing old age makeup, while her husband, Jake, accepts a Nobel Prize and performs a song from Oklahoma, one which is often removed from certain productions for being too damn sad and creepy. Like it or not, it's the Jake Show now. There are bits and pieces of the ending that I really like. We stan a benevolent and tolerant ice cream clown queen. I always giggle at the way Jake's voice cracks when he sings,
"It was all a pack of lies."
I adore the animated pig, and I would be eternally grateful if someone would please embroider me a sampler that declares in elegant cursive,
Someone has to be a pig infested with maggots, right? It might as well be you.
The ending section isn't all bad, but I miss the young woman. I miss when this was her story. The young woman is a construct, but nevertheless she has been constructed. To quote Dumbledore, and by extension the trans-exclusionary misanthrope who must not be named, even if something's all in your head, that doesn't mean it's not real. The young woman is a figment of Jake's imagination, but the story can still be about her, and it is, until it isn't. From the very beginning, the young woman has concerns about her relationship with Jake. That's right, he is such a milquetoast guy that even his own imagination might abandon him. Meeting Jake's parents certainly doesn't help things. On the car ride home, Jake points out that the young woman has had a lot to drink and that alcohol is a depressant. And a person needs to keep that in mind before making decisions under its influence. He senses that she's unhappy, enough that she might leave him, and he's trying to persuade her to reconsider. That seems to imply that she has a choice in the matter, or at least the illusion of one. Does Jake know that the young woman wants to break up with him? Is she, a thought, even capable of having her own thoughts? Did Jake intentionally design her to be dissatisfied with him because he can't imagine anything else? Look, I love that we don't get answers to any of these questions. What I don't love is that the last stretch of the movie brushes these questions off by ditching the young woman. She doesn't have any agency in the world of Jake's mind, but it's interesting to track how she tries to rebel against it. Whenever Jake gaslights the young woman by manipulating reality itself, she can still feel that something is wrong. He's not hypnotizing her into agreeing with him, per se. He's providing her with new false memories and expecting her to go along with it, which she usually does. She wants to be polite. Politeness is what engineered their whole relationship. In their fabricated history, the young woman always knew there wasn't a spark between her and Jake. But she felt pressured into saying yes when he asked for her number because it was the easy thing to do. She's been saying yes ever since. Jake can control his imaginary world to some extent, change when and where they are and what came before, but he can't change who these people are at their core. Jake's parents aren't idealized versions of themselves. Perhaps they're exaggerated memories, and they're certainly not perfect. His dad is dismissive, and he doesn't really understand him or the things he likes. His mom coddles him and puts him on a pedestal. They spend the dinner screaming and staring and pounding on the table and laughing hysterically at nothing. As the night goes on, the parents start to become more self-aware. Jake's mom even pushes the young woman to go in the basement and
live dangerously,
disobeying Jake's wishes. Jake is losing his grip on how he wanted this evening to go. So he finally relents and agrees to leave. The young woman still doesn't have any say over her situation, but she can still frustrate Jake. Her interests and skills are molded by what Jake wants her to be, and she uses that knowledge to give as good as she gets. When Jake offers to recite a Wordsworth poem for her, she says she's not a metaphorical type gal, but then voila, she becomes a poet. She complains that people watch too many movies, calling it a societal malady, but then she becomes a film theorist. Jake's delighted to have someone who shares his passions, but that doesn't mean they agree. He says that he likes the film A Woman Under the Influence, and the character Mabel really resonated with him. The young woman responds by brassly telling him why the movie is a maudlin disappointment, through clouds of cigarette smoke and a transatlantic drawl. Side note, Pauline Kael was actually from Northern California, but that accent isn't nearly as entertaining. When Jake uses lofty literary references as a placeholder for personality or ideas, the young woman starts to openly mock him, then eventually decides it's not even worth letting him get the words out. Jake's fantasies are being pushed to the limit, and now they're starting to fight back. In the end, however, no amount of fighting will mean the young woman wins. The climax of the film puts her back in the box so Jake can play with his other toys. The young woman says,
But I suspect humans are the only animals that know the inevitability of their own deaths. Other animals live in the present. Humans cannot, so they invented hope.
She, herself, is Jake's hope. She's a daydream to look forward to because he has nothing else. In his real life, the people around him either mock him, pity him, or don't even know he exists. He concocts the fantasy world that we see in the film as a kind of comfort. But even then, he can't catch a break. It's an interesting dilemma, but for my money, that makes him the setting of the story and not the main character. It's important to note that Itote is based on a novel by Ian Reid. So a lot of the frustrations that I have with the movie weren't necessarily Kaufman's call to make. Overall, the film is a relatively faithful adaptation. One of the more notable changes is how it ends. In the book, it's explicitly confirmed that the janitor kills himself at the end. And so does the young woman. Fun times. Kaufman's finale is more open-ended, more melancholy than harsh. And I appreciate that. What remains is that this becomes Jake's story. Or rather, it claims that it always was. And yet, the more I watch this movie, the more certain I am that it was never Jake's story to begin with. Parts of Itote reminded me of the 2012 romantic comedy Ruby Sparks. In that film, the eponymous Ruby is the protagonist Calvin's literal dream girl. They try to navigate their new relationship, but Calvin starts to get tired of Ruby. He keeps rewriting her to be more perfect, not realizing that's an unattainable goal. It's a very clever deconstruction of the trope of the manic pixie dream girl. You know what other movie is glowingly praised as such? Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, written by Charlie Kaufman. The guy knows how to write women, how to give them deep and multifaceted arcs. But in the end of Itote, the young woman gets sidelined in her own story. And that's utterly maddening to me. I don't know whether or not I recommend I'm thinking of ending things. The most I can say is that I'm always curious to see what other people think of it. This does tend to result in me wheedling my friends into seeing it for themselves. Like it's the VHS tape from The Ring and I won't be free until I've passed the curse to someone else. But deep down inside, I know I'll never be free. 3 a.m. will roll around again, and I'll be texting Itote. You up?
Many a new face will please my eye, many a new love will find me.
It was all a pack of lies!